Season number 2 of the St. Louis Dragons franchise is now in the books. I feel like the team showed a lot of promise and improvement compared to our first season as we improved our win total and finished with a record of 6-10-1. Today we will be recapping the entire season, we'll be previewing what to expect in the offseason, and we'll be recapping this year's college football season to add some further context of what we can expect for the NFL draft, which of course will be coming up pretty soon as well. So going into the season, what we really wanted to find from this team was to see which young players, specifically our new quarterback, to see how they would do and to try to figure out which pieces we can keep around long term while building a winning culture and win more games than we did last season. And I feel like we did exactly that. Now there's still a lot of work to be done with this team and we are a long ways to go from where we want to be. But I do think overall this was a fairly successful season. Let's do a quick general league recap, take a look at the standings, and then we'll dive into our team specifically. So we'll go by division. We will kick things off with the AFC, which I definitely think was the better of the two conferences this year, which makes sense because a lot of the better quarterbacks in the league are in the AFC. The North was disappointing, though. The Ravens, the only team to make the playoffs there. The Texans were able to win the South with their late season win against the formerly undefeated New England Patriots, who started the year 16-0. They'll be joined by Buffalo in the playoffs, while the Jets and Dolphins, who started the year off strong, miss out. The Chiefs also win 16 games. They'll make the playoffs with the Chargers and the Raiders. The NFC North had a three-way tie at the top, but the Packers win the division. The Falcons not only win the South, but they get the number 1 seed. And the NFC East does the impossible. All 4 teams not only win 10 games, but they all make the playoffs, with Dallas winning the division at 12-5, while the 49ers win our division, with Seattle kind of falling off the rails after beating us in Week 16. They lost their final 2 games. As for draft positioning, the Saints have the number 1 pick. We are currently slated at number 10. I don't have to calculate a bunch of tiebreakers and whatnot because of our tie against Buffalo, which ultimately ended up costing them a playoff spot. So this is what our bracket is going to look like, and we're going to go through the entirety of the playoffs at the end of the episode and crown a new Super Bowl champion. I want to go through our team and player stats, and before we get started, I do want to point out that Madden Simulation this year has really deflated offensive statistics. Games are more low scoring. Players are getting less yards, quarterbacks in specific. There are a number of QBs averaging like under 200 yards a game, like good quarterbacks, which really should not be the case. So because of that, I think that inflates our team's offensive and defensive numbers to make it look like we had the second best offense in the league and the 30th best defense. And I don't think that's entirely fair because of the league-wide offensive statistical deflation, but we're still 5th in passing yards, 4th in rushing yards, and 5th in points per game. And because of that, I don't want to take away from the very strong statistical season that we had on the offensive side of the ball, despite the fact that the offensive line was not good, and we had door dashers playing wide receiver. And I think that speaks to how good of the year Puma Whitlock had. Now, defensively, we are towards the bottom. 30th in total defense, 31st in pass defense. We are towards the top half of the league in rushing defense, but we're second in terms of points allowed, only trailing the Bengals. In terms of third down percentage, we were at 47%, which is right near the middle. We also had the most third downs and the second most fourth down plays, which again I think shows the offensive deflation because teams are running less plays. I play on 10-minute quarters. There's no reason for the Dragons to have ran more plays than in the entire rest of the league. In terms of fourth down percentage, we are at 63%, high efficiency and high volume on fourth down. And then on 2-point tries, we were 5 for 5, a perfect 100%. In the red zone, we had the second least efficient offense in the red zone, scoring touchdowns less than half the time in the red zone. But on the flip side, we had the number 1 red zone defense. So when teams get in the red zone in Dragon games, it's not a guarantee they're going to score a touchdown. Actually, it's less than 50% to be exact. A lot of red zone field goals for us and a lot of red zone field goals for the opponents. Let's take a look at our individual player stats now. And of course, that starts with the rookie quarterback, Puma Whitlock. And the number 1 thing about this season was to answer the question, do the Dragons have a quarterback? And I think the very clear answer to that is yes. Puma Whitlock had a phenomenal season this year, and he absolutely looked the part as a franchise quarterback, and I think his steady improvement throughout the year was noticeable. He was a good player early on, but really around that Niners game, which was the worst game of his career, I feel like that was a turning point, and he played well in every game after that, minus the Chicago game, and if you take out the turnovers, he was awesome in that game. The lows were never too low, and the highs were never too high. The passer rating, very consistent. Total yards, very consistent. He threw a touchdown in every game, but only had one with 3. In terms of turnovers, he only had 3 multi-interception games. He always threw between 20 and 28 completions per game. The completion percentage and yards per attempt is a little bit more sporadic, but other than that, his game-by-game offensive statistics are very consistent. That level-headedness for a rookie and steadiness is really impressive. Puma finished towards the top in a lot of league statistics, finishing 3rd in yards behind Burrow and Mahomes. He was pretty high up in terms of touchdowns and interceptions, which I think is largely because he threw the ball a lot. He was sacked the most of any QB in the league, which isn't really a surprise, and he threw 72 more passes than any quarterback, with Deontay Harris, the other talented rookie, coming in second, which again proves the point of deflation in terms of offensive stats. Puma Whitlock is now the all-time rookie passing yards leader. He has also attempted and completed more passes than any rookie quarterback ever, and he's second in terms of touchdowns behind Justin Herbert. He hasn't been sacked the most out of all the rookies all time, which is a positive. That honor obviously belongs to Derek Carr with the expansion Texans. Puma Whitlock would not have broken some of those records without a 17th game. He was not far ahead of Andrew Luck in terms of yards and attempts, but still, hats off to Puma Whitlock. What an impressive rookie season, despite the fact that the supporting cast around him was not great. I will say I thought the run game was pretty good. I think that Joe Mixon and DeAndre Swift both complemented each other very well, and Puma Whitlock gave us a nice element to the run game out of the quarterback position that we didn't really have last year. Now, Mixon and Swift are both free agents this upcoming offseason. Mixon missed some games this year. DeAndre Swift has been an injury-prone player in the past, but he did play all 17 games, and both guys are an asset in the passing game. I don't think the Dragons are going to want to invest big money into a running back, but if the price is right, maybe one or both of them will return. As we look at the receiving numbers, obviously Isaiah Likely leads the way. What an impressive season he had at the tight end position. And if we take a look at the league leaders, Travis Kelce was the best statistical tight end. After him, Mike Gesicki and Isaiah Likely are neck and neck. Likely, in terms of receiving totals, was 3rd amongst all tight ends. He was ahead of some very notable receivers and tight ends. Mark Andrews, for example, had like 300 less yards than him. And we talk about Mark Andrews as a top 3 tight end in the league, and deservedly so. And Isaiah Likely took his numbers this year and shattered them. Now, the receivers were a little bit more inconsistent. Greg Dortch had a solid season, but I don't know if you can necessarily trust him as a full-time starter. He did lead our receivers in terms of yards and touchdowns this year. Michael Thomas finally turned a corner, I feel like, and he played all 17 games. He never got hurt. And then Griffin Weaver III was probably our most productive receiver, but he also had a lot of rookie mistakes, and he missed 5 games due to separate injuries. I think Weaver probably will get a bigger role in the offense next year. I think he's earned the opportunity. As I said earlier, both running backs, major assets in the passing game. Swift finishes 2nd on the team in receptions with 60. Him and Mixon combined for around 100, while Michael Gallup was solid when healthy, and Tykeem Keon Jr. showed some flashes as well. We need more consistency out of the receivers, but I feel like everybody individually wasn't that bad. The same can be said for the offensive line. No one specifically struggled, but I think the unit as a whole was not very good. Puma Whitlock got sacked a lot. The run game wasn't bad, but it was inconsistent. And of our main 5 offensive linemen, 4 of them, with the exception of Kenyon Green, are not under contract next year. So we're probably going to have a very new look offensive line. As for our defense, a lot of guys, again, individually played well. But in terms of team statistics, we were towards the bottom of the league again. I will say I think the defense was definitely better than it was last year, and we saw some strides. I want to give Devin White a shout out because I feel like we haven't really properly given him his flowers this year. Of course, last year he led the league in tackles and he was just flat out awesome. But he led the league in tackles again this year, which is a little bit of a surprise because he started the year off a little bit slowly, and I was kind of worried that maybe last year was a fluke. Maybe now that he has his big contract, he doesn't really care as much. Wrong. Ever since week 9, look at the tackle totals. 14, 12, 10, 12, 11, 15, 11, and 11. He's consistently making plays in the backfield. Second in the league in terms of tackles for loss. Behind his own teammate, might I add. And he was solid in coverage as well. He was not the only good linebacker, though. We gave Owen Popo the keys to that second linebacker spot, and he did not look back. 97 tackles, 13 for a loss, 3.5 sacks, 3 interceptions. Popo was pretty good at the beginning of the year. He was pretty good at the end of the year. But in the middle of the season, he was one of the best defensive players in the league. I thought our secondary was solid. I wish we had more consistency from that unit, but we did have some guys play well. Jordan Whitehead had a good year. I thought Okuda was pretty solid. But when we really talk about this defense, everything sort of starts and ends with Simeon Bonnet, the second-round rookie out of Tennessee, who had a legitimately unbelievable season. 53 tackles, 25 for a loss, which led all players across the entirety of the NFL. He had 12.5 sacks, which is ridiculous for a rookie. And again, this guy wasn't even picked in the first round, but the impact that he had on our defense was unbelievable. He also had 3 fumble forces, which was also at the top of the league. This guy's making plays in the run game. He's pressuring the quarterback. He's getting sacks. He's forcing fumbles. He's doing everything, and he literally transformed our front unit, which gave so much opportunities for the other guys. Joseph Osai, I thought, was a solid rotational pass rusher. Javon Kinlaw has been really good when he's on the field. The problem is he is made of literal glass. Jelani Tavai was pretty solid. Emmanuel Ogba had some good moments this year. But really, all these guys got opportunities because Simeon Bonnet opened up the pass rush so much. Owen Popo and Rock Ya-Sin lead in interceptions with 3. Jeff Okuda and Demore Diggins with 2. We forced 12 fumbles as a team, which was towards the top of the league, but we only recovered a third of them. Simeon Bonnet leading the way with 3. Simeon Bonnet completely transformed this defense, and if we can have more consistency at all 3 levels, I feel like this defense could be really good. We already have the star power with him and our 2 great linebackers. As we look at the special teams, there were some ups and downs this year. Cameron Dicker, the kicker, only missed 6 total kicks this year, even though it felt like he was kind of inconsistent and sporadic throughout the year. I will point out, he did not miss a kick from inside 49 yards, outside of 1 extra point. The problem is he was not a very good deep kicker, 2 of 7 from beyond 50, which really closes the field for us a little bit. Maybe next year, assuming he's our kicker again, we may have to go for it a lot more when we're on the 30-something yard line. I thought Presley Harthan had a good year as our punter. And then in terms of kick returning, Griffin Weaver was fine. I don't know if he's going to be the kick returner again next year, especially if he gets a bigger role in the offense. Let's take a look at the awards for the NFL season. We should have some guys certainly in the running for those, especially our rookies. We'll start with the MVP, which ultimately ended up going to Jalen Hurts, who had a great season with the Philadelphia Eagles, leading them to a playoff spot. Very well deserved. A lot of the usual suspects here in the top 10, but as we get to the bottom of the list, look who it is in 10th place, the rookie, Puma Whitlock. How cool is that? Top 10 in the MVP as a rookie. We'll start with the AFC awards. We'll go through those briefly because, well, we are not in the AFC. One of the biggest storylines this year was the development of Rashee Rice, who wins the Offensive Player of the Year. Max Crosby wins Depoy. Monty Bradley and Demir Stalin win the Rookie of the Years, while all of the positional awards go to mostly Kansas City Chiefs, with a couple of Raiders in there as well. As for the NFC, the Offensive Player of the Year is, once again, Jalen Hurts, with no Dragons on the list, which I guess is understandable. None of our skill position players were that spectacular. Puma Whitlock does not make it. Micah Parsons wins Depoy, with Simeon Bonnet coming in 3rd place, only behind Micah Parsons and Aaron Donald. Again, just a remarkable rookie season, not just statistically, but how he opened up the defense for everybody else. Owen Popo was in the top 10 for most of the year, but he fell out down the stretch. Puma Whitlock does beat Deontay Harris for the Offensive Rookie of the Year. Puma's passing numbers started to really go above Harris towards the end of the year, and Puma's much more of a threat as a runner than Deontay Harris, but Harris won more games. He nearly led the Vikings to a playoff spot. I see the argument for both of them. We got a few playmakers at the top with Dynamite Williams, Kareem Shaheed, and then Griffin Weaver, who comes in 5th, despite missing 5 games. Had he been healthy for the entirety of the season, maybe he's as high as 3rd place ahead of the other 2 receivers. The Defensive Rookie of the Year, obviously to no one's surprise, is going to be Simeon Bonnet. This was never really a question from the start of the year until now. He has been far and away the guy in this class, with the number 1 overall pick, Solomane Samaro, coming in 2nd. Pass rushers make up the entire list, other than Demore Diggins, who comes in 8th. And I think Diggins could get a bigger role next year. I thought he was pretty solid as our nickel corner. He was a lot better in that role than Caleb Farley was, who, of course, we traded away at the deadline. Jalen Hurts wins the best QB with Puma Whitlock in 8th. CMC wins the best running back with Mixon and Swift on the list. Obviously, we had no one in the running for best wide receiver or best offensive lineman. Bonnet comes in 3rd for best defensive lineman. Popo is 7th for best linebacker. I feel like Devin White should be on that list as well. And then Cameron Dicker finishes in 7th for the best kicker award. So we do get some awards with our 2 rookies, Puma Whitlock and Simeon Bonnet, taking home some hardware. So now let's go through our studs and duds of the year. We'll be going through guys who either exceeded or did not meet expectations and rewarding them and punishing them accordingly. For those of you who need a reminder of what the stud and dud of the year voting looks like, here it is. So for our studs of the year, we will give a +3 to the overall rating of our 1st place winner. 2nd place gets +2, 3rd place gets +1, and the winner will also go up in development trait unless they have already gone up during the season. Simeon Bonnet, for example, has completed 2 breakout challenges, so he would not be eligible to move up in development trait because he already has. As for our duds of the year, it's very similar. The biggest loser of the award will lose 3 points to their overall rating. 2nd place will lose 2. 3rd place will lose 1. And the loser, the number 1 loser, will go down in development trait. If all 3 players cannot go down for some reason, then they will all lose an additional rating point. Of course, there is a Google form in the description for you guys to vote. And we will start with our studs of the year. Our first candidate is Simeon Bonnet. No major surprise here. He was exceptional this season. The best player on our team, period. Compared to the other 2 stud of the year candidates, I think Bonnet had a little bit more expectation considering he was an 80 overall off the jump. But even I could not have expected him to be one of the 10 best defensive players in the league as a rookie. Isaiah Likely is our second candidate. What a great season he had, leading all NFC tight ends in catches, yards, and touchdowns. And this is a guy who kind of came out of nowhere, didn't start last year, and this season he was far and away the best receiver on this team and a much-needed safety valve for our rookie quarterback and a guy who we can expect to be around long-term. Owen Popo will get the 3rd spot, a guy who was just a special teamer last year, and I really liked the flashes I saw from him on special teams, and I trusted him enough to make him a starter, not going after any linebackers in free agency or the draft, and that decision really paid off because he had a phenomenal season. He was a playmaker for us defensively, probably the 3rd best player on that side of the ball, behind Bonnet and Devin White. It was very easy choosing our 3 stud of the year candidates. I kind of narrowed it down to these 3 back in like week 10, and it never really wavered. Choosing dud of the year candidates was a lot harder, which is odd because we only won 6 games this year, but there weren't many guys who were individually disappointing. The offensive line, for example, was not good, but there wasn't like one guy who we can easily scapegoat. So I'm going to do something a little bit different here. Our dud of the year number 1 is going to be the entire offensive line. The unit as a whole was not good, so we are going to punish everybody. If they lose the vote, then everybody here will lose 3 to all of their blocking ratings. If they get 2nd place, they will all lose 2 to their blocking ratings. If they're 3rd, they will all lose 1. Emmanuel Ogbah is our 2nd nominee for the dud of the year. He started the year off strong, 2.5 sacks in the first 3 weeks of the year, but just 1 after that. For a guy who is the 11th ranked left end in the game, and he's probably in the top 5 in terms of his salary next year, he should be doing more. I get he missed some games at the end of the year, but with Simeon Bonnet opening up the defense, I expected a lot more. So, other than those 2, I had a really hard time figuring out who my last nominee would be. The other disappointing area of the team was our receivers, but again, there was nobody individually bad. Dortch was pretty good. Michael Thomas was a lot better than last year, and he was healthy. Griffin Weaver's a rookie. Michael Gallup was hurt all year. So I decided to kind of think outside the box and pick Will Dissly. And maybe it's a little bit unfair because he's not a starter, but the thought process here is that Will Dissly was the starting tight end last year, and we did not get that much production out of him. So we make Isaiah Likely the starting tight end, and he explodes within the same offensive playbook. And yes, the quarterback play was a lot better, but even so, why couldn't Will Dissly have done that last season and kept his starting job? So that's sort of the logic there. Again, it's maybe not really all that fair to Will Dissly, but he is a starting caliber tight end in this league, and after he got benched at the beginning of the year, we really didn't look back. I kind of thought about Nyheim Hines as well because he physically did not show up to the first game that we played with him on our team, and then the second game he played, he suffered a season-ending injury, but I can't really pick a guy who's played 3 downs for us, and on all 3 downs, not only got the ball, but got a somewhat decent gain. I feel like picking a guy who played 3 snaps for us really would not be fair, although I was kind of tempted by it because there weren't many other great choices. So those are our studs and duds of the year, and now we'll be shifting our attention to the college football season and recapping that. For most of the year, Callaghan October has been the consensus #1 draft pick. We have been looking at him as one of the best quarterback prospects of the last 10 to 15 years. However, he is no longer projected to go #1 to no fault of his own. He had a really good year at Michigan. He threw for 35 touchdowns. He was one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the country. But here's the thing. Dasani Madison had the greatest statistical season in the history of college football, and I am not exaggerating. So Callaghan October threw for 35 touchdowns this year. Some seasons, that might lead the entire country. Dasani Madison more than doubled that. And no, I am not exaggerating. He threw for, wait for it, 77 touchdowns this year. No, I am not lying. He threw for 77. Dasani Madison took Joe Burrow's 2019 historic Heisman season and threw it in the lake and flushed it away. Madison essentially shattered every major statistical record, and he had the greatest college football season ever, no debate. Not to mention, his Alabama Crimson Tide ended up being the #1 seed in the college football playoff, winning the SEC. The other conference champions were Oregon, Middle Tennessee State, back for a 5th time in 6 years, Washington, Texas A&M as the Group 5 representative, and then Cincinnati, who won a really competitive Big 12. The 6 at-large teams were Ohio State, no Puma Whitlock, no problem. The Buckeyes were not as good this year without Puma, but they were still one of the best teams in the country. Then we had the reigning national champion LSU Tigers. Again, no Otto Askew, maybe not as good, but no problem. Penn State gets a spot, Baylor gets a spot, Notre Dame gets a spot, and USC with Amari August gets a spot. Of these 12 teams, only 3 of them have not made the playoffs during our NCAA Next Up save file, being Penn State, Texas A&M, and Cincinnati, all making it for the first time. We have some national championship winning teams in here. Obviously, LSU won it last year. Ohio State won it the 2 previous seasons. So let's take a look at what happened during the duration of the playoff. So it was mostly chalk throughout the duration of the playoffs, with the biggest surprise being the 12-seeded Cincinnati Bearcats upsetting Ohio State in the first round, upsetting Washington in the second round to make the Final Four. The Bearcats have a number of NFL prospects on their roster, led by quarterback Zachariah Drake, who was one of the biggest overall risers through this year's season and has played himself into going within the first 2 rounds of this year's draft. Other than that, there weren't any super major surprises, with Baylor, Penn State, and LSU winning their first-round games, and then Alabama, Oregon, and Middle Tennessee State beating them. Alabama ended up going to the national championship, ending the Cinderella run for Cincinnati. They would play against Middle Tennessee State, who finally got over the hump. The Blue Raiders have been close to the national championship in this series before, and they finally got there, led by one of the best offenses in the country, with potential first-round quarterback Juan Escala Salazar and his #1 receiver Matthias Abanda, who played as the best receiver in the country this year. But ultimately, Middle Tennessee State did not have enough on defense to stop Dasani Madison and the Alabama Crimson Tide from ultimately winning the national championship. Unsurprisingly, the college football playoff MVP was Dasani Madison, who across the 3 games against Baylor, Cincinnati, and Middle Tennessee State, he threw for over 1,000 yards and 15 total touchdowns, capping off, again, the greatest singular season in the history of college football by winning a national championship for the Alabama Crimson Tide. This is what the whole playoff bracket looks like as we take a look at the awards. Obviously headlined by Dasani Madison winning the Heisman Trophy, and of course, the College Football Playoff MVP with his stats listed below. As for some of the other notable award winners, Zachariah Drake, the Cincinnati quarterback, won the Maxwell. The Walter Camp ended up going to a sophomore running back, wide receiver hybrid, Erubis Dorlum, out of Texas A&M, who had a great season. Sir Broderick Hillingham IV, the standout LSU defensive tackle, won the Bednarik, Nagruski, and Lombardi awards, with the other award winners consisting of Tornado Davis, the running back out of Houston, who is in this year's draft class, Matthias Abanda out of Middle Tennessee State winning the Biletnikoff, Devin Luang winning the Mackey, Jake Louie and Junior F.A. Olukedo winning the Offensive Line Awards. Freshman Fakoi L. Poseo out of Alabama won the Butkus Award, and then Cam Lucifer II, the projected top corner in this year's draft, won the Jim Thorpe Award. Let's dive into Dasani Madison's season a little bit more, though. As you can see on the right, here are his numbers stacked up to all-time college football records. He finishes just barely second in terms of passing yards in a single season all-time, not quite being able to edge out the record set by Bailey Zappi in 2021 with Western Kentucky. He is the all-time leader in passing touchdowns by around 20. Nobody else has thrown for more than 60. He leads in all-purpose yards and obviously all-purpose touchdowns with a ridiculous 81. Playing in 16 total games did inflate his stats a little bit, obviously, but he still would have broken all of those records. He threw for his 60th touchdown in the first half of his 13th game, the SEC Championship, so he still would be the record holder if not for the expanded playoff. In the 3 playoff games, again, he was fantastic, throwing for around 400 yards and 5 touchdowns in those games, while only throwing 1 interception across the 3 matchups. The Alabama offense scored at least 40 points in all 3 of those games, beating Middle Tennessee State 52-39 in a very high-scoring game where both offenses really played well, but Madison's 5 touchdowns were obviously too much for the Middle Tennessee State defense. Dasani Madison is obviously not the only player whose stock has changed throughout the season. A lot of players have moved up and down the board based on their performance this year, and we do have some late additions to the draft class, mainly of underclassmen who have declared, along with other final additions. Kyer Moore, the LSU running back, has declared. He is the top projected back in this class now. Isaiah Ivey out of Texas A&M, Trey Layton from Penn State, and Tyshawn Keon from Texas are some of the other late additions in terms of skill guys. Antos Fori, a guard out of USC, declares. Luciano Bustamante from Middle Tennessee State has put himself into top 10 conversations, the talented pass rusher who had a great season for the Blue Raiders. Finnegan Howell Coleman out of Nebraska is an intriguing two-way player who plays running back for them as well. Bernie Dutch out of Texas declares, and then Isaiah Youngblood, the corner out of North Carolina, will be taken out of the draft class. He has decided to stay for his senior season. Next year's cornerback class is obviously not going to be as good as this one, so he sees that as an opportunity to potentially be a high pick, whereas this year he'd probably be an early second rounder. That's what the draft class looks like for now. We're going to continue to see guys' stocks move up and down based on how they perform during the off-season events, specifically the Combine, which we will go into more detail on during the draft preview. The final order of business in today's episode is to go through the NFL playoff results, and we took a look at the bracket earlier today. Now it's time to see what happens. I decided to write down my prediction before the postseason, and I'm going to pick the Cowboys and the Ravens to make the Super Bowl with Lamar Jackson leading Baltimore to the championship, with my bold prediction being that the New England Patriots lose their first playoff game to whomever that may be. The Patriots were great this year, there's no denying it, but I don't fully trust them. In the first round, the 6 division winners all won, and the highest seeds will be moving on with some close games here and there. Baltimore squeaks away with a win. Close one for Green Bay over the Giants. Let's move into the conference championships, where it was mostly chalky, except for one game. The 16-1 Kansas City Chiefs would fall to Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. My Super Bowl prediction is still on with the Ravens in Dallas, while the 2 1 seeds, New England and Atlanta, also move on. The Patriots' lone loss this year came to the Texans, and they get revenge, beating them by just 3. Who will be playing in Super Bowl 59? Well, ultimately, I ended up getting half of my Super Bowl prediction right. It's going to be the Super Bowl that absolutely no one in America wants, the Dallas Cowboys and the New England Patriots. Can we root for a meteor to drop on this stadium instead of having one of these two teams win? Please. Both conference championship games ended up being decided by just 3 points. Very close matchups. Let's take a look at the Pro Bowl rosters. I was hoping to see Puma Whitlock here, but I get it. All these quarterbacks made the playoffs. I'm still not sure why the Packers won't pay Jordan Love. He's scheduled to hit free agency. Jordan Addison and Rashee Rice, the wide receiver ones in their respective conferences. That's pretty cool. Isaiah Likely makes the Pro Bowl. No surprise, but it's good to see him officially here. Very well deserved. He obviously was phenomenal this year, one of our 3 candidates for the stud of the year. Nobody on the offensive line, obviously. And then defensively, Simeon Bonnet makes it. Again, no surprise, but it's good to see the rookie officially on this list for good. There are a few rookies scattered throughout the Pro Bowl here. There's not a ton, but there are a couple, including, obviously, Simeon Bonnet. Other than that, we had no other Pro Bowlers. I thought maybe we'd see Devin White or Owen Popo here. Neither of them get in. No special teamers, and nobody else really deserved it. So if we were to get 2, I think they made the right choices with Isaiah Likely and Simeon Bonnet. We're going to simulate to Super Bowl week, but before we cover the Super Bowl, the fun thing about this week is this is where players go up in development trait, and we do have a few guys who have moved up, a few notable guys to be exact. As we look at the offense, we're going to notice some very interesting changes. The biggest one, of course, Puma Whitlock, superstar X Factor for winning the Offensive Rookie of the Year. He also has 2 skill points as well. So Puma Whitlock is an X Factor going forward, and he will start next year as an 84 overall, disregarding the morale boost. With morale, he is currently an 87. He's a top 10 quarterback in the game. For now, I'm deciding between Gambit, Bazooka, and one of the other superstar abilities. I think it's Run and Gun, the other one I was looking at. For now, we're going to set it at Gambit. I think that's a really good one. But for those of you who know more about superstar abilities than I do, please feel free to enlighten me down below in the comments. He's pretty close to being an 85 overall in most of his archetypes, which should give him a lot more abilities. Isaiah Likely goes up to superstar after being one of the most statistically productive tight ends in the NFL this year. Again, very well deserved. He doesn't have many abilities yet, but he should as soon as he gets to around an 80 overall. Nobody else moved up on offense, which is fine because nobody else really deserved to. And then defensively, there's one difference, and again, it's a noticeable one. Simeon Bonnet goes up to X Factor with 3 skill points. Simeon Bonnet was drafted with normal development. At the end of his rookie year, he has X Factor. That is unbelievable. He had 2 breakout challenges and then goes up naturally here at the end of the year. I'm still deciding between superstar abilities with him. I think for now I have him set at Unstoppable Force. I also like Fearmonger as well, but I think Unstoppable Force probably is the best of the pass rushing X Factor abilities, at least in my experience. And for now, I like his superstar abilities as well. He will have one more that he'll get to once he's a 95 overall. So for the first time in team history, we're going to have an X Factor next year, and we're going to have 2 to be specific, and it's our 2 main building blocks, our quarterback and our best defensive player. I'm happy that we have these 2 guys as our 2 X Factors to be the 2 staples of this team going forward. Nobody else moved on defense for now, but Owen Popo will go up because our other 2 stud of the year candidates have already gone up in dev this year, with Isaiah Likely getting superstar development. And remember, you can't go up again in development trait with stud of the year voting. So that leaves Owen Popo as the only guy who can go up. So he will automatically get star development regardless of where he finishes in the stud of the year voting. The draft class now has 7 X Factor players of this first draft. Puma Whitlock and Simeon Bonnet joined the 5 who were drafted with it, being Chase Hunter, Dontavius Brown, Monty Bradley, Sergio Jimenez, 2 Colts, and Dynamite Williams. The first 3 guys picked in the first round, Jimenez and Dynamite Williams both day 2 picks. As for the superstar development players, Puma and Bonnet were here, not anymore. Instead, we have Solomane Samaro, Finn Heineman, Kenya Ketch, Yosepi Macias, Stat Humphreys, Bryson McDaniels, and Jonathan Kingston. Along with us and the Colts, the Dolphins are the other team with at least 2 players here, and their 2 superstars, Stat Humphreys and Jonathan Kingston, were both drafted in the 3rd round. So now it's time to see who wins the Super Bowl, the Patriots or the Cowboys. Both of these teams with rookie X factors at wide receiver. New England with Chase Hunter, the Cowboys with Dynamite Williams. Will either rookie help lead their team to the promised land? And ultimately, the New England Patriots get the job done. What a historic season for the Pats, winning 16 games in the regular season, taking it all the way. Although Dak Prescott did play well, he was better than Mac Jones, but Dallas could not stop the former face of their franchise, Ezekiel Elliott, who turned back the clock, scoring 4 touchdowns, 3 on the ground, 1 in the air. Obviously, Zeke is the Super Bowl MVP. Tony Pollard was also good for Dallas. Defensively, Micah Parsons and Christian Barmore were amongst the standouts. Brandon Cooks also with an 100-yard game. So as we look at the season recap, New England gets ring number 7. Zeke gets the Super Bowl MVP, and we see all the awards. The interesting thing I noticed here is that there's only one Dragon listed. Simeon Bonnet for Defensive Rookie of the Year, obviously. But I was hoping to see Puma Whitlock for Offensive Rookie of the Year, but they gave it to Monty Bradley with the Bengals instead. I feel like Puma got robbed. Monty Bradley averaged under 4 yards a carry. He scored 15 times. That's great. But he was also one of the least efficient running backs in the entire league. Joe Mixon last year in that offense was significantly more efficient, and he even scored more. So I don't get that at all. I feel like it should have been Puma Whitlock, but maybe that'll add some more fuel to the fire for our new X Factor. Next episode, we'll be going through free agency. We have $107 million in cap space with over half of our starting lineup and a lot of our key backups not under contract for next year. Despite the fact that our team is new, we have one of the older rosters in the NFL, and we also have a lot of expiring contracts. We're going to have some big decisions to make, letting guys go, re-signing others, and we're going to have to manage our money smartly as we don't have a ton of financial flexibility despite having cap space in the triple figures. So that's going to wrap up today's episode. Let me know who you think we should re-sign, who you think we should let go. Should we swing big in free agency and go after a really good player, or try to fill out our roster as best we can leading up to the NFL draft? I hope everybody enjoyed. I know it was a long episode, but we had a lot of stuff to go through. Make sure to vote for the studs and duds of the year down below in the comment section. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.